So my dad, Walt Lara, he always says that I know the land and the land knows me. And this has been the philosophy of our people for thousands of years, is that when we travel to places that we're responsible, we're protected, we're connected. But after colonization and during the time of contact, when settlers moved into the area to find homes, to build, renaming spaces, renaming places that have their own gathering site names, their own fishing spot names, are now being renamed after the people who, quote, discovered them. And then you have people that are using these spaces as natural resources, as a financial gain. Several years later, the state park and national park come in, and they have lands that they are managing and protecting in their way. But now you have indigenous peoples that these spaces where they engaged in ceremony and they engaged in gathering and they engaged in fishing for thousands of years now no longer are able to do this because those lands are owned, quote, by other people. And so we come into a space where now indigenous peoples are understanding that land ownership is important to be able to sustain the natural environment, to be able to protect it, to be able to engage and interact in ceremony and in the ways that we have for thousands of years. So an example is the village that I'm from, Chapek, is actually listed as an archaeological site rather than a place of ceremony, a place of community gathering, a place where people have been for thousands of years, a place where my ancestors are from. Because it's owned, quote, owned by a different entity, it can be given a label. And with that, a meaning and a new understanding and a new worldview and a new description of what its purpose is. And so that's why it's so important for us as indigenous peoples to reconnect, reclaim, identify what these spaces, what their purpose is, and for people who are a part of the community to understand the history behind those spaces as well.
I think the colonialization process, the culturation process, has been quite effective. And our understanding of land and land use takes on significantly the non-Indian perspective. We believe in ownership now, whereas historically we didn't. And I think that makes a significant difference in how we treat the land and how it exists today. If you own something, you can treat it badly. And we just need to look around at the amount of clear cuts and the amount of destruction that people have caused because of private ownership. State ownership, federal ownership of land, that they believe in a concept called the land is vacant, terra nullius, and if there's no people living on it, then it's open for destruction, unfortunately. And we look at significant areas of BLM land and U.S. Forest Service land, and we see significant destruction happening. Logging practices have been running rampant around here. Oil, gas, and oil development has been significant, and you know, the ownership has been significant in terms of how non-native view the world.
I can't necessarily speak for a whole tribe, but for me personally, like, my ideas of land ownership have changed. Not changed, but like perspective of it because of the ceremonies that are our responsibilities, the places that we need to go to do those responsibilities aren't always owned by tribes. So if they're owned by a logging company or a rich individual that doesn't live here, then we have to get those permissions to go onto those lands to be able to facilitate and gather or burn or pray, you know, in certain spots. And if we have to ask for permission or like jump through hoops or, you know, most recently, the past couple of rounds, it's been like the snowy plover, where you know, animals have more rights than we do to land that we like I want to say that belongs to us, because I don't like that, but that we have responsibility to, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So like, as far as like my perspective of it changing, it would be like it's an advantage and a tool of this world that we sometimes are forced to take advantage of to be able to do the things that we need to do. So if we when land gets taken, when land gets given back, I had this conversation in the barbershop earlier, and it was kind of upsetting about like this person was asking like, well, how much land do the natives need? Like, how much of an empire are you trying to build? And it's like, it's not an empire. It's a responsibility. And it's like, it's not. And the more that we have given back, right, is the more we have access to do the things that we are meant to do. So if that's fishing or gathering or hunting or ceremony, you know what I mean? Like, those are things that make us who we are, remind us who we are, also like get us out of what I would call like this fast-paced world, right? The instant gratification, the flashy screens, like get us into nature, get us into the real world. And in turn, I feel like that like encompasses like the mental wellness piece of it too. So giving land back, giving resources back also adds into our ceremonies, adds into like our mental health as a people to be able to do the things that make us who we are, and again like brings us back to our responsibilities and who we're meant to be. But without the ownership of that land, then it presents a lot more challenges.
I think that the views of land ownership, you dominate, you own, you have rights, you protect, versus you live in harmony with. You don't ever overexploit. I think it's an amazing system. Think of the Klamath River and think of all the andromedous fish that enter that system. They enter 20 miles up the coast here. Every andromedous fish in the system. And before contact, pre-contact, there were fish runs that fed whole populations all the way up to the Klamath Basin. So, first group that was had control of the harvest of that, Yurok folks. And then Paliqua upriver, so Nur, Paliqua upriver to the Trinity. Let's go up from there, Karuk, and then you get into Shasta, Modoc. You keep moving all the way up. There were systems in place and agreements in place where people would only harvest enough fish to sustain their populations, but also considering other folks that also had to have food, that is a food resource, and then still have enough fish that were available for breeding stock. And that was a system that went on for thousands of years. That's a pretty sophisticated culture. That's a different way of looking at it when in the first 20 years of contact, you had people setting up factories to kill and process fish right at the mouth of the river. You had people practicing mining techniques that essentially dumped sediments into all of these rivers. Even as early as the 1870s, because of hydraulic mining, Westerners put laws in place restricting that because the Sacramento River was so choked up with sediments that it was bleeding brown into San Francisco Bay. The impacts are so great. But I think it's a different perspective of the land. Kishen had mentioned earlier, talking about that relationship to relatives and being of a place and being part of a place. That's different than coming in and dominating and exploiting resources of a place. A lot of times you'll see language like the taming of the West, out into the wilderness, all this kind of stuff. Like you have to be this rugged individualist. Does anybody say the living in harmony with all peoples and all things? Not as catchy for a kind of a macho thing. But when you have a colonial system that's based on domination and extraction and, changing of culture through force, it's different than, think about this, even from, indigenous people. From village to village to village, there were differences. And people tolerated differences. That's the way they do it. A lot of names that you have are names, what do Native people call themselves? People. You think of Yurok, the largest tribe in California, Yurok tribe, And what's that word mean? Does it mean we the people? It's a Karuk term that means downriver, those folks that live downriver. And that gets picked up by Western society, and that gets persisted and changed. I think that we really miss out when we don't preserve and honor the differences that we have as human beings.